Welcome to Behind the Markets here on Business Radio, powered by the Warren School. I'm Jeremy Schwartz, Global Head of Research at Wisdom Tree. My co-hosts are Warren Finance Professor Jeremy Siegel, author of Stocks for Long Run and the Future for Investors, Lee Chen Ren, the Director of Modern Alpha at Wisdom Tree. Also joining us on the program today is Kevin Flanagan, Head of Fixed Income Strategy at Wisdom Tree. Please note Kevin and I are registered representatives at Foresight Fund Services. Professor Siegel is a Senior Advisor to Wisdom Tree. Our discussion is not tied to offer sale investment products, and the views of our guests are their own and not those of Wisdom Tree's affiliates. We're discussing how we open the economy. One of our first guests has been publishing and talking a lot about the risks of staying closed and how he thinks we need to be thinking about opening up. We're going to talk about the oil space, one of the big categories we've been coming back to again in the last few weeks. A lot of continued volatility. Our second guest is going to give us his take on what's happening in oil, particularly midstream energy companies. So it'll be interesting second part of the show. But Professor, just checking in, we had March sort of record falls, then April record highs. We're going into May. What are we thinking? Sell in May, go away, at least on Friday?
On Friday, it looks that way. Yeah, we're down about 3% on the S&P. Well, we had absolutely remarkable gains. I mean, I'm not surprised yesterday and today we're selling off a little bit, and that certainly could go further. I mean, very honestly, the economic news that we got out and in terms of the ISM, I mean, it's pretty much on target. As I say, everything is in a rear view mirror. The hit, we're getting March data, of which half is okay and the other half is a disaster. I like to concentrate on a couple of things. First of all, the good news on the virus front. The remdesivir trials is actually much better than even some of the press made it out to be. And it was actually an interview on CNBC this morning with the CEO O'Day of it. There's a couple things should be noted. First of all, it was so good that they stopped the trial to give the people with the placebo the regular treatment. This is not always done, so this is a strong result. The fact that they can ramp up to 1 million doses by the fall or there shortly thereafter is also extremely good. The fact that most antivirals actually work better in early administration rather than the late administration. And by the way, these, in contrast to the University of Chicago study, when none were on ventilators, up to 30% were on the ventilators. And the NIH study, this was actually the best study, better than the Chinese, better than the University of Chicago. This was really a very, very good study. 30% were on ventilators. So there's even hope that if it's administered earlier, it will be more effective. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, but it's got to be infused in the hospital. It cannot be made into a pill, but it could be made into a nebulizer, like you take asthma medicine to get into the lungs. I mean, this is all obviously speculative, but really it is good news. And, we're getting other news on not only antivirals, antibodies, and vaccine, and a lot of these trials are coming on. So I'm actually very, very encouraged that we're going to have a lot more tools, even if not a vaccine by this so-called second wave. We're going to have a lot more tools. That said, I mean, there is selective opening. I believe there should be, and there should be monitoring, and we should have more testing to identify those points. I definitely think we are moving in that. Cuomo was just on saying that New York's cases deaths are declining very definitely. Admissions are plateauing at around 900 to 1,000 a day. So the decline is nowhere near as fast as the ramp up. It's really slow. And there is a sign of plateauing, so it isn't that all of a sudden it's disappearing. So, one still has to be very, very careful about this. Nothing really else from the second wave of the PPP is on, and I think that we're some of the flaws of the first one are going to be corrected. More people are getting treatment. One last thing I want to say is, and I brought this up each time, and that is the money supply is exploding in a way that I have never seen before. In the last 5 weeks, The M1 money supply is up 17%. That is just about the same that it was up during the entire year of the week before the Lehman bankruptcy to a year later after all the programs that the government. So in 5 weeks we have matched, and we're going further. And it is my belief, as I've stated many times, that this tremendous surge of liquidity, once we get treatments and confidence returns, is going to cause very, very strong economic activity in 2021.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the big themes we keep coming back to. And I know we have Kevin from our fixed income team. Kevin, you've been watching some things on the central bank side. Anything there? We had the Fed and we had the ECB. Anything coming out that you're focused on?
Yeah, I'm just, kind of echoing what the professor was saying, looking at the Fed balance sheet for the latest week. This was the first time we actually saw a little bit of a slowing momentum in their Treasury buying, which is good news. And I think Powell referred to that or referenced it during his press conference the other day. Essentially, I think the Fed is seeing an easier condition now in the Treasury market, so they don't feel the need to be as aggressive in buying. And just to throw some numbers out at you, so if you were to look at a comparison right around mid-March, before they came out and said they were going to buy $500 billion in Treasuries, $250 in mortgage backs, and then, of course, after that, they pretty much said there's no limits on this. But if you take that 6-week period, if you were looking at the average Treasury buying at that time, it was $231 billion on a weekly basis. And within this past week, the number came in at only, $62 billion. So that, I think, is good news. Also, looking at some of the funding market gauges that we're seeing out there, especially in LIBOR, beginning to come down in a visible fashion as well. So I think, Professor, to your point, the Fed is certainly seeing some results from the programs that are out there. And this is all without even the municipal facility, and the primary and secondary corporate market facilities still haven't hit the balance sheet yet. So there's more to come.
Yeah. Jeremy, is Li Qian on this morning?
Yeah, Li Qian, we have Li Qian as well.
Yeah, I like your comments on the trends that you see. You follow them so very closely.
Thank you, Professor. I think the opening general will be successful. I know a lot of people are worried about a spike up, but I think a lot of the people taking precautions is enough to make the stabilize. So I think that risk, I'm on the positive side. In terms of the other therapeutics and vaccines, I don't know enough. I did talk to some people on the vaccine side that they think it's a little bit less optimistic in terms of the timeline that the government gets out. But I think the other cases is that different states have different ways of opening. Is actually in some way good because it gives us a more data variation. Just like Sweden offers another way of looking at this virus. So I think all these are different points of data. One thing I do want to point is there's so much statistics. People focus so much on the death rate, but I really feel that for this virus, the other two statistics, which is the hospitalization rate and the transmission rate, these two rates are actually more important for the opening. Because if you believe we can open, then as long as there's hospital capacity, then we are okay. And as long as the transmission is lower than this spike, then I believe the opening will be successful.
And I think except for some of the very early days of the New York, spike, we have been able to accommodate everyone in hospitals and everyone with ventilators at this point.
Yeah, I think all the dashboards, almost all most of the states have a hospitalization dashboard. They're all looking pretty good. And the other testing statistic I track is from St. Clair County. They actually, it's the only state I got this statistic, only place they've every day they tell you how many days it takes for a test to turn around. So, a couple of weeks ago, it is more than 2 days, and now it's, getting closer to 1.5 days. So all these are good news. 1.7 depends on day to day, but you can see that it's it's a pretty, in the direction-wise, it is getting. I think for this opening, if the testing turnaround time can be within 1 day, then it really helps, because the virus transmission is very, this virus transmits very fast. Yeah. So the faster you get testing done, the faster you can identify people. So that statistics, I wish more states and counties could release that statistic, but so far Santa Clara County has been releasing that statistic consistently, and almost every day you've seen this number going down.
Hey, Li Cheng, let me ask you a question. A lot of the concentration or the headlines for Europe have been with Sweden, Italy, and Spain. How about Germany? Do you have any insights on what we're seeing in Germany?
So Germany, I think from all the numbers, it shows it's really one of the best in Germany. I think Germany in the beginning got a lot of coverage internationally, probably not as much in the U.S., is that their testing was very broad. It was much broader than any other European, because in the early, about in February, they released a statistic, what's the median age of the Germans who are tested positive. And in Germany, it's 40, which means, half of the cases lower than 40 years old. And that is the distribution of cases if you have wide testing. In the U.S., that statistic has been consistently more than, closer to 50 or 55, if you look at the age range.
That's why the death rate was so low in Germany compared to all the other countries, much lower.
Yeah.
Because the testing of the cases and the death rate is so much lower for the younger one, it gave a much lower, way below all the other countries on the death rate relative to the cases confirmed.
Yeah. And the issue Germany is struggling right now is actually exactly the same issue U.S. is struggling. It's the nursing homes. In the U.S., a couple of states, for example, Pennsylvania, released very detailed numbers for nursing homes. And I can quote quickly a few statistics, which is really shocking in the sense that, in Pennsylvania, 66% of the deaths is in nursing homes and healthcare facilities. And 20% cases, they account for 20% of cases, but they account for 66% of the deaths. So, of course, we want, the virus to lower outside, in the normal environment, because nursing homes, they still need people to take care of them, right? There's some people who say, we can just, infect the young and protect the old, but that in reality is actually very hard to do, because the older people need the young in these nursing homes to take care. In the U.S., there are about 1.3 million people who live in nursing homes. Unless you say everybody who take care of them also live in the facility, it's not realistic. So I think Germany also have a similar issue in terms of their deaths. But their testing was pretty wide, and that is, I think that's one of the reasons that the number of new cases, they came in down much faster than all the other countries in Europe and including U.S.
Let me just bring quickly a reintroduction of the show and our first guest, who I think has some views on how we're going to open the economy that I'd like to get the professor's take on as well. We're going to bring in Edward Stringham, who's the president of the American Institute for Economic Research. He's also the Davis Professor of Economic Organizations and Innovation at Trinity College, the editor of the Journal of Private Enterprise. Welcome to the program, Ed.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I think your colleagues and you hosted a webinar presentation called COVID-19, Must We Choose Between the Economy and Health? What were your basic themes and conclusions from that discussion there?
So I think everybody agrees we need to minimize harm and protect particularly the vulnerable. The one thing that a lot of people have been portraying is that there's a trade-off between health and the economy, that if we want to protect more people, we need to close the economy. And most of the people that I've been interacting with at my institute say that's a false choice, and that if we continue this lockdown and overly restrictive policies that prevent people from going to work and food companies from distributing food, that can have consequences that are potentially much worse than the disease itself. So I think we do need to be focusing on protecting the vulnerable and at the same time figuring out how to let just get Americans back to work and looking at the potential downsides of keeping us locked down potentially indefinitely.
No, Li-Shen, you have a view on how soon we should be opening? You know, you were one of the first to tell me to stay home. When do you think you would want to get back out of the house and back into the real economy?
So the great news is, for optimism, I would say two things. One is the VIX, implied volatility of stock markets, CBOE things are going down a lot from 80 to 35, and that's highly correlated, maybe by chance, but maybe not, with the number of countries with rising COVID cases of over 5%. So that's been falling a lot worldwide. In New York City, it turns out that the governor just released a statistic of serology tests. If you test a random sample of New York City residents, look at their blood, see if they have antibodies, which indicates that they fought off the disease. 25% of New Yorkers already have fought off COVID-19. Doctor the other day said that in the Bronx, that number is as high as 40%. And one epidemiologist, data scientist who studies epidemiology, says once we're at that stage, we're going to be the virus is already spreading throughout society much faster than people thought. And once we get up to 50%, we're already starting to get to what's called community immunity or herd immunity. And we have to be very careful, obviously, for the vulnerable, the people in those nursing homes who are much more likely to get killed by this disease. But that doesn't mean that the rest of society needs to be quarantining in place, especially all of these people who've already had and recovered from the disease. So I think that Sweden actually is taking the right approach. They've let restaurants stay open this entire time. They do practice what we might think of as voluntary social distancing, but they have not shut down businesses, and things are going, I would say, a lot more smoothly there.
If I may, I want to add, I agree that I think for long term, definitely voluntary social distancing is the key. You know, you cannot use just stay forced for people to stay at home, when there are lots of people who also, and I do believe the opening will be successful in the sense that lots of people will continue to do social distancing. On the other hand, I do want to make a quick comment on Sweden. It's true that Sweden, the economy is still, but actually if you look at the GDP growth, they also suffered very much economically as well. So I believe the economy of growth was the negative was close to their neighbors. And I do believe that, I agree with the professor. I think more states, because they already have if the original goal is healthcare capacity not be reached, right now, if there's ample healthcare capacity, then states should allow people, to the business to open and rely on voluntary social distancing.
Yeah, I also want to mention about Sweden. It's they have very strict rules, even in restaurants, about no bars, no standing at bars, distances between tables. They've already closed down 5 of them that were not practicing proper rules. They've also closed schools, I think, above 8th grade. They also have no sports, no events. It is not business as usual, life as usual in Sweden.
No, yeah.
So
completely
it's
agree.
not, and these things are enforced. It's just a lighter enforcement and an opening like what I think we're getting in the States now, moving hopefully towards that Swedish model.
Yes, definitely. I agree with everything.
Yeah. I want to add another point is that right now, because every country wants to do better for its citizens, right? But because this virus is really 2-year or at least 18 months war, in some way it's very hard to judge whether this country's path is on the optimal strategy until you look back in 2 years back. Like, for example, if having infection provides some kind of immunity, then a country like the U.S., which had had a run-up, actually offers better positioned for the second wave. So I think right now it's very, very hard. Of course, we want to learn what each country is doing well, so that we can do well here as well. But it's very hard to judge whether any country is on the optimal strategy until 2 years or even 3 years back.
I agree. I'm going to wax philosophical. Wasn't it Kierkegaard, the philosopher, said that we really only understand history by looking backwards, but we're all forced to live it going forward. So we will know in a year and a half, wow, which model worked the best.
Yeah, that's right. What worries me the most is the supply chains of food. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal a couple of days ago about how they're going to have to be euthanizing pigs, which means that there's already people who don't have as much food as they should, and that's really going to negatively impact those people. And so the idea that we could just sit around and do nothing and wait for perfect certainty is just not an option. And to be thinking about having the hospitals not overrun, I think, is a very important thing to think about. The good news is it's very clear the hospitals did not get overrun. And so the initial arguments that I was hearing from the medical community was, let's slow the spread of the disease. You cannot prevent a virus, many viruses, perhaps including this one, from spreading throughout society. It's very clear that it's all over the world. It's all over the United States. So the idea was we don't want to have the hospitals overrun. And they said, okay, stay at home for 2 weeks. That's very different from an indefinite lockdown, including lockdowns of people who, at this point, it turns out, have already had it, many people, and those people are still locked down. And then also businesses. It's one thing for a business to shutter its doors for 2 weeks, but to shutter its doors for 2 months, we've got a situation where the oil capacity of storage it's just clogging up, and that's why we see negative futures prices in that. That's tremendously difficult for oil-producing countries such as Nigeria. Now they're in a very odd situation of potentially needing to shutter some of their wells. And it's one thing for us academics in the United States to think about, okay, well, let's put things on hold until we know things. But, people in Nigeria are going to be facing major suffering the longer this thing gets drawn out.
Yeah, I think right now most states are already following Georgia and Texas. So I think the worry is that a lot of states will be continue shutting down. I think that worry is probably much less.
Yeah, and actually it's interesting because I went to Trader Joe's here in Philadelphia on Monday, the March 16th, and this is just when everything was exploding. And I'll tell you, a lot of things were off the shelves and weren't available. I went 2 days ago, and it was all filled. Now, I do know that there's a beef problem, and some of those processors, are closing down, and Trump has ordered they open. But actually, I do think there is enough food. Now, we've had food problems with certain portions of our population even before the virus, and we have to be sensitive to that. But actually, I think that from what I look around, there's some of those panic buying is gone, and those panic shortages are gone.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's amazing the way that markets have handled it as well. I'm in New York at present, and I could comment the same thing is true here. The stores ran out, and now they have everything that we need, and that's great. But in terms of long-term, there are businesses that have these long-term strategies of distributing things in particular ways. I mentioned the oil a minute ago, where it takes a while before these storage facilities and these boats get full of oil, and you can postpone things for a few weeks. That's not a problem. But if it starts getting to become months, and we think about this in the food industry, where people are not able to conduct basic business that is necessary for their long-term businesses to succeed, I think that will be a compounding of the problem. So I do see optimism moving forward. I think we can see that in the prices in stock markets. I think people are thinking that the economy will get back on track, and I think that we need to be starting to think about the health issues as well, that we can't be just shut down and locked in forever.
This has been a great segment. I wanted to sort of close with one final question for everybody here, just to get a poll of how people individually here are feeling. Professor Siegel, starting with you, when do you think you'll be going back to Penn? And Li Chen, when do you think you'll be getting on a train to New York? What are the curious? And then Ed, any other travel schedules? How do you think that'll play out?
Well, I think we are holding classes in the fall, definitely. The question is, some will be remotely. They're saying the large classes, because of crowding, might be remotely. The small classes that have enough, could be distancing every other, might be held. They haven't decided yet. Obviously, it depends on the course. Right now, I cannot go to my office without calling up and some security person accompanying me there. I can get into my office, but it is really, under that degree of lockdown. However, they do say, in August that they will reopen the building so we could get back to our offices.
I think in New York, most likely will start opening soon, even in May, much faster than people are thinking in terms of businesses. But on the other hand, for me personally, it's actually the other trend, which I think this work from home trend and also work digitally trend will actually further. So our trips to New York will probably less frequent, in the sense that business now realize that its productivity has kept up when it's remote working. So that could substantially change how business, or particularly our kinds of business, operates.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm more productive now. And Ed, your final comments on how you are traveling.
I've been stuck in my house for the last 6 weeks, but I started venturing out the last week, going to the pharmacy, and it is a little bit gloomy. Everybody is not looking so happy, but I can report, looking out my window,
where do you live, in Manhattan, or
I'm there right now, downtown, and I'm can look out the window and say that the parks used to be empty, maybe a couple people, and then this weekend more and more people, 15 people, kids out there playing. So I do think that the optimism of people thinking that they're not going to die, kids are not going to die if they go outside, at least in terms of public sentiment, it looks like it's changing here to being more optimistic for the future.
That's a great way to end our first segment. We have Ed, Li Chen, Kevin, thank you. Professor Siegel, thanks for joining. We're going to